Hi, everybody, and this is Pastor Jamie. Welcome to our Wednesday devotional. We're thinking about the letters of the Apostle Paul. We're in the book of 2 Corinthians. Last week I asked you to read chapter 1 through 3. This week I'd like you to slow down and read and study chapters 4 and 5 of 2 Corinthians. Corinthians is written by the Apostle Paul to real Christians in a real place called Corinth. Today I want to focus on chapter 4 and 5, but really on chapter 4. Chapter 4, verse 1, he says this, "Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart." Do you ever lose heart? Do you ever want to give up? Do you ever lose hope? Do you ever get criticized? These are all things that happened and were happening to the Apostle Paul. He was being criticized by fellow church leaders. Imagine. He was being put down by congregants in the church. And it was so easy for him to lose heart and become discouraged. But he says, God's given me this ministry. It's God's mercy that's given me this ministry. And then he jumps down to verse 7, or I'm going to jump down to verse 7. Then he says this, very important, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." This ministry that you and I have, this gospel, this good news, this story that we believe in, that we want to share, that we want to live out, this story that's founded on the event of Jesus' death and resurrection has power. The Greek word is dunamis, from which we get the word dynamite. Dynamite, it's that kind of explosive power. Paul writes in Romans, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of all who believe." The gospel, the good news story, is about power. The power to change and transform lives. The power to convict us of sin. The power to bring those of us who responded from a state of lostness to being found, of weakness to strength. Paul writes, we have this treasure. The treasure is the gospel. It's the content of the gospel. And the content of the gospel, again, is about a person, the person of Jesus, the one who died and rose from the dead, who taught great things, a lot about himself and who he was. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay. Now think about that imagery, a treasure. If you had $10,000, would you put it in a jar of clay? Maybe. If you had an expensive ring, or we usually put treasures in an appropriate box or an appropriate shelter, something really nice. But we have this treasure, Paul says, in a jar of clay. Think about a jar of clay. A jar of clay doesn't necessarily look real good. It's often cracked. Or can be easily cracked. Clay is not a real strong container. It's easily cracked. It's easily broken. And Paul says that it's not the container. It's the contents in the container. It's not us. It's God. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. And we need that because look what Paul says next in verse 8. We're hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. There's a whole nother teaching there, but Paul suffers. He's been called by God to suffer. I don't want that call. We're called by God to suffer for the sake of others. I know some of you want to get back to church tomorrow, but we're not because one, it's not safe, and two, we put our own needs aside for the sake of others. Paul writes to the Philippians, think not only of your own selves, but also to the needs of others. Paul suffered for the needs of others. He suffered greatly. Then I want to jump down in verse 16 because it's powerful. Please do read the whole chapter and slow down and study it. But he says, therefore, we do not lose heart. He ends where he started. We do not lose heart. And then I love this next line, though outwardly we're wasting away. Isn't that true? As we get older, we do waste away. My knee, my ankle, my shoulder, ow. I'm wasting away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Paul calls his sufferings light and momentary. Read in 1 Corinthians about his light and momentary troubles. Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians 11. He says, 2 Corinthians 11:23, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Wow. There's someone who's suffered, but he considers all that light and momentary compared to the eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And then let me close with this thought. So we fix our eyes, we focus, we pay attention to, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. My friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, may we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, so that we can have an effect on what we see. May we fix our eyes not on what is unseen, but on what is unseen, so that we can have the strength, the all-surpassing power of God to be the salt and the light of what we can see. And certainly, we need that in our world today. May you and I not lose hope. May we not lose heart. May we follow where Jesus calls us to go. May we realize that we have this treasure in jars of clay, because the all-surpassing power, it's not from us, it's from God. Amen.